Ladies and gents, welcome to Punk Politics. I'm Abe Thompson. The great minds of the Conservative Party who have allowed our schools to crumble into a state of disrepair over the last decade, or Concretins, as we shall now refer to them, have been out on the rounds over the weekend, seeking to gather the reins of the scandal in a sort of damage control capacity.
Just so you have the scale and the context, there's 22,500 schools. We're talking about 156.
We have 22,000 schools in the country.
So already we have taken action in 52 schools, more than any other country in the world.
Amazing, isn't it? That when they sense that things are deteriorating for them, they can deploy £1 million PR analysts and damage control consultants in the blink of an eye. No expense spared. Just wrap a tourniquet around it and try to stop the bleeding, guys. There's no time to waste. When it's a matter of public safety, of children's safety, over the space of a decade, well, then it's just another can that can be kicked down the road a few years. Indeed, if it's a publicly funded comprehensive with a collapsing roof and the possibility that kids could actually be killed?
The warnings have been there for years.
People have been moaning and warning governments about the state of our crumbling schools for years.
Well, then that instant damage control becomes less a preventative measure and more a sort of performatively regrettable post-mortem, doesn't it? Oh, I'm really sorry that happened. Over there. Yeah, no, it's really sad. For you? Anyway, by now you'll be aware that at the end of last week, over 100 schools in England, poorly maintained and underfunded for years, were ostensibly told they were no longer safe to set foot in. Just as a side note, like, if it's a question of poorly maintained but publicly funded sites, do you know what you should do? Like, if you're a head teacher of one of these places, you know what you should do? You should disguise your school as Buckingham Palace and then just stand back and wait for your local Tory MP to get confused and throw £500 million at it.
Just a few days before the term restart, the government has now told more than 100 schools that they must close classrooms for fear it might collapse.
Like, when this story broke on Friday, I mused at the time. I was like, if this is a thing about publicly funded buildings, cash-strapped local authorities, it's only going to be a matter of time until the scandal bleeds out and engulfs hospitals and care homes too. Like, if this is cheap concrete that was brought in to keep costs low, you can guarantee governments and local authorities will have used the same stuff in other elements of the public sector too. God, I hate being right. But don't worry, guys. In the midst of this scandal, in this emergency, you'll be pleased to know that, well, I mean, its members like to think of it as a sort of fourth emergency service. The reputational management and damage control PR guys of CCHQ were right there this weekend to reassure everyone that, don't worry, everything's fine.
Just so you have the scale and the context, there's 22,500 schools. We're talking about 156.
We're only talking about 150 schools that could be designated death traps. So just focus on the other 21,850 that aren't. You know, I mean, when you think of it like that, it's actually an incredible success. It's like, this mother and her 3 children were left devastated this morning as husband and father Tony was killed in a collision with a liquored-up lorry driver at junction 5 of the M3. Oh my God. But fortunately, local MP Gillian Keegan was there to provide some words of comfort. Well, the other 22,000 drivers who used the M3 this morning, they reported a safe and pleasant journey. So that's actually a staggering success rate, really. I mean, it's a sort of happy story, this one, isn't it? So yeah, always good to see Keegan putting that Fact Check UK Tory rebrand sheen on it, isn't it? I suppose it's sort of nice in a way, right? You know, as we're knocking on autumn's door, the evenings are drawing in, maybe your seasonal affective disorder is jiving with your remortgage, giving you a bit of a case of the Mondays. In your lesser moments, you confess to feeling somewhat crestfallen. Well, in that scenario, you know, sometimes it's nice to hear somebody say
22,500 schools. We're talking about 156.
It's just 150. out of 22,000. Like, why are you focusing on the bad stuff, Captain Buzzkill?
And we'll be contacting parents, the schools will be contacting parents.
Schools will be in touch with parents. I mean, ultimately, we are accountable for this. This is our mess. It's our neglect and our bad government. But make no mistake, we will absolutely be getting the schools and committees to be making those unpleasant phone calls for us. But hang on a minute, like, if this is your mess and you're the party of responsibility, shouldn't you be talking to the parents in your constituencies directly? I mean, that's what you say, isn't it? You always say, you've got to take responsibility. And you know they would just be like, yeah, you've got to take responsibility. Not us. You take responsibility. How are you not getting this yet?
If you don't hear, then don't worry about it. This is not something we want parents to worry about.
This is not something we want parents to pay attention to.
If you don't hear, then don't worry about it.
If you don't hear anything, don't worry. Really? After a decade of sitting on their asses and allowing this murderous problem to set in. And like, now we're at this stage. Now we're at this stage of the problem. And she's like, yeah, if we go a bit quiet, you know, just, yeah, don't panic.
If you don't hear, then don't worry about it.
That is like, you know, like imagine a deadbeat dad who did a runner on you like 13 years ago. He didn't pay your maintenance all those years, and then finally you catch up with him. You're like, you piece of shit, you deadbeat motherfucker. And he's like, all right, okay, fine, like, you got me. And you're like, okay, well, look, now that I do have you, right, Isla needs some new shoes, she needs a new bag for school, and can you take her on Sundays? Because then I can actually clean up the flat and I could maybe go and see my mum, finally. And he's like, oh, right, yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, I'm just about to board a plane. And you're like, oh, no. And he's like, no, just chill. Like, I know I did you wrong, you know, 13 years ago and all that. And he, like, yes, I can totally fix all the stuff that you were just babbling on about. But listen, like, just right for now, I've just got to catch a plane. And listen, if you don't hear anything from me, don't worry. Yeah, like, just don't call me. I'll call you. Right.
About it. This is not something we want parents to worry about.
I mean, I wasn't worried about it before last week. I mean, maybe I was drunk on British exceptionalism or something. Maybe I took all the flag waving and the 5th largest economy and the fastest growing thing in the G7. Maybe I took all of that to heart. Maybe I was just wasted on British exceptionalism because I never dreamed in a million years that decrepit school buildings and collapsing ceilings, crushing my kids to death. I never dreamed that would happen in the UK, in a first world country. I mean, on the San Andreas fault maybe, but that could never happen here. Not in good old Blighty.
This is not something we want parents to worry about.
Like, were you worried about it before last week? I wasn't. Before I thought there might be a chance my son had come out at 3 o'clock looking like a Twin Towers survivor. Like, the whole thing is so perfectly Tory, isn't it? I mean, here you have a cabinet comprised mostly of privately educated conservatives. That is who they are. Eton, Winchester, Harrow, Wellington College. The safety levels in a state school, it's not a matter that's ever likely to reach out and touch them or any members of their family, like personally, ever. So to some extent, they are and always will be detached from it, right? But even if you subscribe to the idea that you don't have to have gone to a state school to care about what happens in state schools, when we look at the context of millionaire Tories sequentially, successively, industrially, ideologically neglecting state-funded education to the point that it becomes a death trap. I don't know, like, my question to some of you out there who might be a little more forgiving in this thing is like, okay, all right, you might not have to be poor to care about poor people. You might not have to have gone to a state school to care about state schools. But when the state of those state schools, like when all of the evidence points to a majority privately educated cabinet who couldn't give a king's cross about state schools, well then it's a bit like, you don't have to have state school people in the cabinet to run state schools, eh? I feel like right now I'm looking at 3 dead kids and a supply teacher and looking back like, yeah, probably wouldn't hurt though, would it? Of course, now government is saying they'll spend whatever it takes to fix the problem, which sounds like a solution, doesn't it? But actually, it is precisely the problem, because the funds for education are no different to the funds for the NHS or police or social care. Ministers put things off, they slash budgets, they cancel programmes, they wind down initiatives, all the while thinking or pretending to think that they're saving money. But then the things that they cut blow up in their face, and then they have to magic the money to pay for it. Plus, by that point, it's an emergency, so they have to get emergency contractors in, and they cost twice the money. Plus, they've already spent the money they thought they were saving, so they're way in the red. Also, from a journo-political angle, they've now expended political capital, parliamentary time, media appearances, everyone dealing with the fallout of this cretinous short-termism. Like, if you just spent the money on what you should have spent the money on before, it would just be taken care of, and right now you'd be sat on that sofa talking about the thing that you actually wanted to talk about. Instead, you decided to make ill-advised cuts, it blew up in your face, and now you're sat there answering questions you really don't want to have to answer. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you think this is all the result of ideology and classism? Or do you think this is actually quite normal in a way? It's kind of run-of-the-mill, like building materials, they tend to expire, they need renewing, and maybe this is something that local authorities and the schools themselves should have been aware of, and maybe they should have maintained them better themselves. Are you a parent? Was your kid just about to go back to school this coming week, and now they're going to be back at home with you indefinitely until your local authority can find the materials to build a whole new school? As always, let me know in the comments below. I'm out this Mother Hubbard.